Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited about today's video because I'm going to be talking about my all-time favorite fantasy romance series. And the reason that I'm so excited about this video is because fantasy romance is my all-time favorite genre. I'm obsessed with it. It just checks all the boxes for me. I love the fantasy world building, creatures and all of that aspect of the fantasy. And then obviously I just love romance. I just can't help it. Oh well. So today I'm going to be recommending my favorite fantasy romance series to you guys, and I love all of these books. They're honestly, as I said, just some of my all-time favorite books. Or all-time favorite series. So I would highly recommend every single book that I talk about today, every single series I talk about today, because they are all series, which obviously is super common when it comes to the fantasy genre. So I recommend all of these. Yeah, they're all 5 out of 5s for me, top of the line. If you're gonna read any of the books I talk about on this channel, read these series. So this video is probably gonna be super long because I could talk about these books for forever. So I'm gonna try to keep this intro short, and I'm gonna try to keep each book or series I talk about short, but no promises. So if this video is super long, I apologize, but honestly, these books are so good, and I'm gonna shut up now so we can get into them. Okay, so the first series that I want to talk about today, which will come to no surprise to you guys if you have watched some of my previous videos, and that is A Quarter Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. And honestly, I don't know why. No, I know why, but I'm obsessed with this series. And actually, my favorite book in the series is the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, and this book specifically is so good. But I don't want to go into this book because obviously then I will be giving away what happened in the first book. So I'm just going to talk about this book, give a little summary just to give you guys a little brief intro to what this series is like, tell you guys why I like it. Obviously it's already a 5 out of 5, you guys know that. So I'll quickly talk about this book. But yeah, it's so good. So the first book in this series, A Court of Thorns and Roses, is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but then afterwards when you go into the second and third book, they're no longer retellings. It just kind of, this is how it starts the story, and then it kind of goes off from there. We follow our main character, Feyre, and she is a human, and so there's human and there's fae and other different fairies and creatures and stuff. So Feyre is a human, and she is the caretaker of her family. They pretty much rely on her to survive. She goes out and hunts, and she gets their food for their family so they can live. So one night when she is out hunting in the woods, she sees a wolf, and she's so excited. She's like, I'm gonna be able to feed my family for weeks. So she ends up killing the wolf, but unfortunately it's not just a regular wolf, it is actually one of the fae. And by killing this wolf, she kind of breaks this treaty that the fae and the human have, which basically is they can't really interact, and obviously they can't kill each other. So as retribution for killing this fae, the High Lord Fae of the area that he's from, it's called the Spring Court, the High Lord from that area comes down and is basically Feyre, you killed one of my men, and so you have to come with me. You're gonna be my prisoner now because you killed one of my men, essentially. So obviously you can see kind of where it relates to Beauty and the Beast here. The father goes to, the Beast castle and whatnot, and then he takes the father, and then Belle goes and she wants to take his place. So now Belle is held prisoner at the Beast castle. So just the same way, Feyre is taken to the Spring Court in the Feylands and is kind of held prisoner in the Spring Court. However, when she gets to the Feyland, she realizes it's not really a prison at all. It's actually this beautiful, magical, mystical land, and she starts to kind of fall in love with those magical elements and the spring, because it's a Spring Court, and all this other stuff that she realizes that she never had because her family was dirt poor and she had to go out and hunt and take take care of her family. So now she's kind of it's nice to have a break from that and not have to go hunt for food and starve 90% of the time. I'm kind of, living my best life, essentially. She doesn't have to worry about food. She has everything she could want, and she, is being held prisoner against her will, but it's not she's not, really having a rough life in prison. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it there because I don't want to give too much away, because honestly the book is so good and I don't want to ruin anything. But, just to give a little teaser, she ends up kind of really falling in love with this kind of like new life that she's handed, and the, you know, high fae Tamlin, who has taken her prisoner, you know, isn't exactly hard on the eyes either, and you know, maybe some feelings start to develop there, and she kind of has to make this choice. Does she, you know, want to go back to her life and her family, or does she want to stay here, and what is she willing to risk, and what is she willing to sacrifice along the journey, I guess you could say. So yeah, so good. Romance is so good. The world building is really good. I think that Sarah J. Maas does a really good job of like building the spring court and the different lands in Prithian, which is like the continent that they're on, and there's like the different courts of like the Fae area. So there's like the spring court, the summer court, etc., etc. So I think that's really interesting, and like when you're in the different areas, the temperature and the weather changes, and the style changes, and the way people look changes. So I think that's really interesting. And honestly, like, I'm gonna say this about every book I talk about, but I just love everything about it. As I said, world building is great, romance is great, a little steaminess, not too much, but it's just really good. So yeah, as I'm gonna say with every book that I talk about, or every series that I talk about today, I'm gonna highly recommend it, and please go read this book. Okay, so the next series that I want to talk about is The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen, and this is actually an enemies to lovers romance that I can get behind. So normally that's not my favorite trope. I just find that it's super overdone, and a lot of times done in a bad way, where they're like enemies, lovers, and there's no like actual space or time where they like get to the lovers part. It's just so instant, and that really bothers me. It's like the way instant love bothers me, right? Nobody wants to read a story where they fall in love in the first 30 pages. It's just not believable. It's not realistic. Enemies to lovers bothers me when it's done wrong, but in this book I find that she does it right. So in this book, we follow our two main characters, Lara and Aaron, and Lara is the daughter of like this basically ruthless king, and he sent all of his daughters, including Lara, to the desert when they were just, you know, like little girls, to be trained as assassins. And when Lara is old enough, she is married off to King Aaron, who is the king of the Bridge Kingdom, which is, I guess, this like really just like strategically placed land that can benefit off of its location. So it's kind of in the middle of everything. So if this country wants to trade with this country, they have to go through the Bridge Kingdom. So the Bridge Kingdom has control, they can benefit, they can, you know, profit off of their location. So Lara's dad basically is like, I want that, I want the benefits that come with that. So Lara, you know, go marry this king. But it's not this like, you know, beneficial marriage where they're gonna get married and then her dad benefits from that. It's more like, Lara, go marry this king and then go assassinate him so that I can rule the Bridge Kingdom. However, it's obviously not just that simple and tied up. When Lara gets there and she meets King Aaron for the first time, she realizes like all this stuff she was told about him, you know, growing up is just totally not true. So, you know, she was told he's ruthless, he's mean, he's horrible, he's, you know, all of these bad things, so we should kill him, you know, he's a bad person. And now she's starting to realize that actually he's really not. He's kind, he's nice, he's loving, he cares for his people. And so now Lara's like, wait, who's actually the bad guy here? Is it Aaron or is it my dad? So she's kind of having this internal struggle, which is one of my favorite parts about the book, is this kind of like battle that she has in her head of like, what's right and what's wrong, and this is what I came here to do, this is what my dad wants, but like just because that's what he wants and just because I was trained to do this doesn't mean I should do it. Like, what's right and wrong here? So I think that whole internal struggle that she has between right and wrong and what she was told, and you know, why all this stuff kind of comes together in her head, and I just think that's really interesting. Also, another thing that I really like about this book is the pace of it. I think that it goes really fast. Like, I think I read this book in one sitting. My roommate even read it in one day. It honestly just goes straight from page 1. I think there's like a jaw-dropping moment on literally like page 2. Like, it just picks it up right from the beginning. You're intrigued right from the start. There's no, you know, information overload that sometimes can happen with large fantasy series because they're building the world and introducing all these different characters. She really just jumps right in, which I think is just so like helpful to really just getting hooked into the book and like not wanting to put it down. Also, the slow burn romance that they have is so good and what makes this enemies to lovers romance amazing. So it's like, you know, she goes in and they're enemies right off the bat because that's what she was told and that's what she's here to do. And then she really realizes that maybe they're not enemies, and through watching him and seeing him do all these things for his people and really learning, she kind of forms her own opinion about him, and they spend a majority of the book developing that relationship. And it's just so well done. It's just such a good book, and obviously I highly recommend it if you're looking for like shorter fantasy series. So a lot of these books I'm going to talk about are 600 pages and whatnot, so this one's a little bit shorter. It's only about 300 pages to a book. So if you're interested in any of these books but maybe a little intimidated by the length of them, I would definitely recommend Bridge Kingdom as your first one to kind of jump into and like dip your toes into the water a little bit and see if you know, liking this book or liking this genre, and then kind of go from there. So the next series that I want to talk about is the Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this is the first book from Blood and Ash. And this series is so good. Okay, that was really dramatic, but honestly, I just actually read this book and the second book in the last like maybe about year, and it has quickly become one of my all-time favorite romance fantasy series. And like, I just did not expect it to be as good as it is. So in this book, we follow our main character Poppy, and she is the maiden. And as readers, we aren't exactly supposed to know what that means. We just know that she's not really supposed to be touched. She's not supposed to be like seen. She wears like a mask and a veil, and people aren't supposed to like talk to her, touch her, like even like be anywhere near her. She's like super, super isolated, and Poppy hates it. She wants nothing to do with being the maiden, and so because of that, she's like basically constantly breaking the rules. She sneaks out. She, you know, has one of her trainers teach her how to fight, and she's like, if I have to be this, I'm gonna try to at least like do some parts of it my way and try to hold true to who I am, like just like this little much. So she's like, you kind of see right from the beginning that this is not what she wants, and this is being kind of like forced upon her. And one other thing that we do know is that as the maiden, she is supposed to lead the next generation's ascension, which is another thing that we know is happening, that is coming, but we don't know what exactly that means. And so Poppy's kind of living this boring life where she's basically told what to do, what to wear, everything, you know, day in and day out, with her, you know, moments of, you know, rebellion where she sneaks out and, you know, breaks the rules a little bit, until one day one of her guards is killed in the castle that she's living, and so she's assigned a new guard, Hawk. And Hawk is basically like, I described him the other day to one of my friends, like he's basically Mary Poppins, like practically perfect in every way. He is like Poppy could not have wished or created a better guy for her. So he's, you know, good looking, he's charming, and he basically sees right through Poppy, and he knows she hates being the maiden, and he kind of like teases her a little bit about it. He's like, you know, touching her hand or whatnot, and she's like, you can't do that. And he's like, well, who cares? It's just us. Like, we can do what we want. So it's like, he kind of starts to pull that out of her, and she's already kind of going in that way, as we see from her sneaking out and doing this and doing that. And then he's kind of like egging her on a little bit, and you start to see this like banter form and this relationship form where, you know, Poppy really likes being around him because he kind of allows her to kind of let go a little bit more than basically anybody else that she's around. So as I said, Poppy's guard was killed, and that's when Hawk comes in, but there's a lot of other deaths that happen kind of back to back to back. So because of that, Poppy is going to be transferred to the capital so that she is safer, and Hawk is the one that is taking her to the capital. Unfortunately, that is not exactly what happens, and I'm going to leave it there because one of my favorite things about this book is that you have questions while you're reading. You don't know what the maiden means, you don't know what the ascension means, you don't know kind of what's the deal with Hawk, where did he come from, and you know, all of this stuff. So it's like, I don't want to give it away because that's what's so good about this book, is that you have all these questions. So I don't want to answer any of the questions, but honestly, just love everything about this book, and I feel bad because I keep saying that, but that's why they're on this list. So I love Poppy. I think she is such an interesting character. You know, I read a lot of fantasy series where there's an extremely strong female lead, right? But Poppy is kind of like this, I guess, like torn person, where she's, on one hand, she's the maiden and she wants to be strong and she wants to kind of live that life, but she's kind of forced to be this maiden. So you kind of see her being the weaker character in the maiden, but then the stronger one, because that's who she truly is. So I like that kind of like juxtaposition between like who Poppy is as the maiden, but then who Poppy is like actually. And then lastly, the other thing that I like about this book is obviously the romance and the steam and intimacy that comes along with this romance. This book, or this series, is probably the steamiest series on this list. It is like up there in steam. It's really good though. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, like it's really good. So if you are looking for a fantasy romance that is a little bit higher in steam, then I would say go for the Blood and Ash series by Jennifer Armentrout, and you will not be disappointed. Okay, the next series that I want to talk about is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. So this is another Sarah J. Maas series. She also writes A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I talked about earlier, and this is a series. So there are 7 books in the series, not including the, I guess, prequel. So if you're looking for a series that's like intense world building, you're committing to the series, you're putting the time in, I would highly recommend Throne of Glass. So in this book, we follow our main character, Selena, and she was raised as an assassin. And the book starts out, she is in, I guess, like prison. It's like a prison for slaves, essentially. And Prince Dorian, who is one of the princes of the like realm, comes to the prison and offers Selena this deal. She can come be his champion in this like competition they're having, or she can stay in this like prison. So obviously she goes with him. And the competition is to find out who's going to be the next, like, I guess, royal assassin for the king or the prince of this, like, country. As an assassin, Selena has kind of like this reputation. So Prince Dorian, when he goes to get her, kind of knows what he's doing. He's like, all right, she would be a good, like, champion for me. She has a lot of experience killing people, and so he's like, if you can win this competition and then be the, I guess, like royal assassin for a few years, you know, you can be on your way and you can have your freedom. So, you know, it's kind of the deal of a lifetime. Spend the rest of your life in this like slave prison, or fight for me and be the assassin for a few years and then go on your way. So while this competition is going on and she's living at the castle and going through these different, I guess, like trials, she ends up getting to know Prince Dorian and his best friend, Captain Westfall, a little bit. And yeah, you can kind of probably imagine what happens there. And she starts to build relationships with the two, and I'll just leave it like that. But on the other hand, while these trials are going on, she's building these relationships, other champions are being killed. So now Selena needs to go figure out who's killing these people, why, and I need to stop them before they try to come for me. So that's pretty much the premise of the first book. And it's funny because, you know, that is very specific and that sounds interesting, and the first book is great, but the series at large is so much bigger than that. We get to travel this entire world in different continents and different countries, and we learn so many different characters, whereas, you know, our first book really focuses on Selena, Prince Dorian, and Captain Westfall. We learn like 15 new characters within the next books, and we get to explore all these different lands. We get to see different, you know, magical creatures, and there's a lot of different romances. So this is definitely a more intricate fantasy series with a lot of different layers and characters and kind of stuff like that. And I would probably say that if you really like Game of Thrones, I would go with Throne of Glass, because I think that this is the only one that even comes near the type of like intricacies and different like stories and how different things happen and then they all come together at the end and affect each other in different ways. So if you're a huge Game of Thrones fan, I mean, I would recommend all these books, but if you really like Game of Thrones, then I would definitely say start with Throne of Glass. And I would also just like to say, if you aren't obsessed with this series after the first book, please, please, please keep reading for kind of the reasons I just said. It becomes so much bigger and so much more intricate, so many more things that go on, where the first book is almost like, I can't believe this is still the same series, kind of when you get to like the 4th and 5th book. So please keep reading, don't give up on it, because honestly it just gets better and better each book. Okay, the next series that I want to talk about is the Infernal Devices series by Cassandra Clare, and this is the first series in chronological order of the Shadowhunters world. So it's not the first series that she wrote, but in chronological order, it is the series that happens first. Also, I'm a huge fan of the Shadowhunters world, and this is my favorite series in kind of like, I guess, the Shadowhunters Chronicles. I just personally think it's the best one. I think her writing is really good. I think the story is the most interesting. The romance is the most interesting. I just love it. I just think it's a really well done series. And this series takes place in England in the late 1800s. We follow our main character, Tessa, and she is traveling to England from America in search for her missing brother. But kind of when she arrives there, she is like kidnapped by these demon creatures, and she's basically thrown into the shadow world that she never even knew existed. And she is saved by Shadowhunters Will and Jem. And I basically can't say love triangle fast enough. This series has my all-time favorite love triangle. It is so, so, so good. So just like the way that I have issues with enemies to lovers romances, sometimes I have issues with love triangles because while I think that they have potential to be really, really interesting, a lot of times I just find that they're done bad and it just hurts the story instead of helping the story. But in this case, I find that it just takes the story like and skyrockets it. It's just so good. Like, it's one of those love triangles where you genuinely understand like the person who has to choose, like confusion and like struggle with who to choose and like what she wants and like all these different things, because Will and Jem are so, so, so different, but they're both so good. It's like how can she choose? Like, and it's like gets to the point where like you don't even want her to choose because you love Jem and Will so much. You don't want either of them to be heartbroken. Where like a lot of times in love triangles, I'm like, oh, I'm team blah blah blah, right? Like Twilight, oh, I'm team Edward. Like you just want Edward to win, right? You just like know that, and it's not really like a struggle that you have. But in this like series, like I swear I never was once like, oh, I want this person to win. It was more like, oh, you know what I mean? So it's like, ugh. And it just like keeps you on the edge of your seat. Like, who is she gonna pick? Like, why? Anyway, so together, basically, Tessa, Will, Jem, and all the other London Shadowhunters need to like fight the forces of evil, right? And that's kind of the whole Shadowhunters situation. They're always fighting the forces of evil and saving the shadow world and saving the humans and blah, 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 right? So that's like, you know, whatever. But I just think the series is so good. The love triangle. Also, I do just want to add that this is more of a YA fantasy than like an adult or a new adult fantasy like the other books that I've talked about. So this one is a little bit more like innocent, I guess you could say. It's not as like steamy. There's still romance and there's still intimacy, but it's just more of like an age appropriate situation for young adult readers. But it definitely makes this list because this is fantasy romance, not fantasy steam. And so this romance is honestly so, so, so good. If you are not a fan of the Shadowhunters world, I highly recommend you try this series first. I think that starting with the first series like that she wrote in the Shadowhunters world, which is not the first series chronologically, turns a lot of people off because it's like one of Cassandra Clare's first series that she wrote, so the writing just isn't as strong. But this series, I think the fact that it takes place in the 1800s in England, and there's, you know, you get the like historical aspect, you get the fantastical aspects, and then this love triangle I just think is so, so, so good. Like, this will get you hooked on the Shadowhunters world, whereas like the first book, the City of Bones series, just doesn't do that as strong in my opinion. So yes, if you're looking for a fantasy romance book that's maybe in the YA genre, I highly recommend the Infernal Devices series. Okay, and the last series that I want to talk about is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson, and this is such an underrated fantasy series that like honestly just needs to be talked about more, and that's what I'm going to do today. So in this book, we follow our two main characters, Kazi and Jace. And Jace is the newly, I guess, appointed king after his father passes of the Bellinger Empire. And they kind of run their empire like they're the only people like in the realm or in the world, right? And not necessarily in a bad way. They're not mean, they're not bad, they're not, you know, torturing their people. They're more just like, this is our situation. We're just going to look out for ourselves. We're going to take care of our people, and everyone else can kind of just, you know, go over there and do their own thing, which isn't that great because, you know, the other countries in the other parts of the world are kind of in that like globalization, trading, all of this stuff with each other, and they almost kind of resent the Bellinger Empire for not wanting to kind of interact with them more. So what happens is the queen of one of the other countries sends Kazi into, I guess, like the Bellinger Empire to kind of, you know, investigate and see what's kind of going on there, and are all those rumors that we're hearing true, and just kind of go in there, be my eyes and ears, figure out what's going on, and then report back to me. However, when Kazi gets there, she's kind of thrown into this like unfortunate situation where she is like essentially like taken, like kidnapped, and she wakes up and she finds herself literally strapped to another person. And she realizes that it's Jace, the king of this empire. And I guess there was just a mistake. Something happened where they were both, I guess, like kidnapped at the same time. So now they're physically attached and need to like get out of their situation. So you could probably kind of guess what happens from there. They're literally attached physically. And so, you know, the emotional stuff comes, right? So that's not really too much of a summary, but again, I don't want to ruin anything because what's so good about these books is that, you know, as you're uncovering all these clues and it all kind of makes sense and lines up. So I don't want to give anything away, but this series is so good, and I honestly don't know why more people don't talk about it. So my two favorite things about this book is, one, the world building. I think that the author does a really good job of building the world in a way where it's intricate and there's different layers and there's different places and there's all these different things going on, but it never feels confusing. It's not overly complicated where you have to like go back and be like, wait, what's that? What's this? I'm confused, or like write things down, right? No, it's not that complicated. So it's, you have all the different like layers and the different, I guess, like world building things going on, but in a very digestible way, which so is something that's a little bit more confusing about, you know, like a Game of Thrones where, you know, I'm watching the first season and I'm like, what the heck is going on? I had to rewatch the whole thing to even understand where the places were, who the characters were, where they're from, why they care, and why they do this, and all these different like little intricacies that end up being so important. Like if that was a little bit confusing to you, then I would recommend Dance of Thieves because I think it's a little bit more of like a dumbed down version of that. And the second thing that I love about this book is the romance and the slow burn romance. So Kazi and Jace aren't like enemies kind of going in. They're just kind of like trying to figure out what's going on. Like enemies is too strong of a word. So I wouldn't call this necessarily an enemies to lovers romance, but I guess you could kind of put it in that category if you really wanted to. But what I love so much about this romance is the slow burn. It's, you know, they don't just get attached to each other and then within 100 pages they're in love. It is very much like a, you know, they're so dedicated to their kingdoms and what they need to be doing and their missions, I guess you could say, that they don't really want to fall in love, but like they just can't help it. And I don't want to give anything away, but honestly, it's just so good. I feel like it's not giving away because obviously it's a romance book. You know what's going to happen. But like, it's just honestly so good. And like, I just hate instant love. I hate it so much. And I just think this book does such a good job, as well as all the other books I talked about. Like, if you don't like instant love, then you're really good with these books, because honestly, I can't stand that. I would not recommend a book where people fall in love within 100 pages. It's just bad. So this book, The Slow Burn, so good. Also, Jace as a character just needs more recognition. Like, you know, you always hear about like Rowan or Carden or all these other people from all these other fantasy series, but Jace, like, people, like, get on board. Like, I need you to catch up to me with Jace because he deserves it. And when you read the book, you will understand why I'm saying that. I would also say that Dance of Thieves is very similar in certain ways to the Bridge Kingdom series that I talked about earlier in this video. And they're not similar in like what is going on. Like the worlds are obviously so totally different. The relationships are totally different. And there are a lot of differences, but I would also say there are some similarities in the way that, you know, King Aaron is, you know, king and Jace has become king, and Lara kind of comes over to kind of figure out what's going on with this kingdom. You know, she's kind of set there to assassinate him, and Kazi's not, but they kind of go in there and they realize, you know, the king isn't exactly what people had made him out to be, and then feelings kind of come from there. So again, they're different, but if you do like one of the books, then I would say try the other one, because there are a lot of similarities that if you like one, you will most likely like the other. But yeah, that is all I have for this video. I honestly cannot recommend these books enough. They are probably, you know, like 6 out of my top 10 favorite series of books of all time. So yeah, I highly recommend all of them. Please, please, please let me know in the comments down below if you end up picking up any of these series and what you thought about them. I would love to hear if you love them as much as I do. And as always, please like this video. Please subscribe if you are not already, and I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye!